The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Well, welcome back to the House of Mystery on KKNW 1150 AM Seattle. I'm your host, Al Warren, and on the side is Kev Thompson.
Hey, Al. How's it going?
Well, that's another day. We've got a returning guest, and his new book, Dahmer's Confessions, and it's...
Now,
what?
This is exciting. This is exciting.
And, okay. Well, let's just get right into it. So this time we're joined by John Borowski, filmmaker, author, extraordinaire. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me on again. It's always a pleasure and great talking with you guys. You know, it's interesting. I'll kind of open this with interesting. Here's what happens to me. This is my life, not daily, but here's what happened today. I open my Facebook and I get a messenger message from a woman that has in her possession John Wayne Gacy's art kit, everything he used to paint his paintings. That paints, brushes, easel, all these things, you know, and of course she was inquiring on, you know, what she should do with these things. Museums, sell them, who's interested. So, you know, that's kind of an example of, you know, the interesting things that happen to me, you know, studying these serial killers and making films and releasing books on them.
That's great.
Now, one has to ask, out of fairness, how is she sure that these were John Gacy's? I mean, how did she buy them? Did she buy them off of, you know, eBay or from somebody?
That's the other thing. Yeah, that, you know, there has to be this provenance, you know, that you have to find out, you know, the proof where she, you know, acquired this. Because, you know, I heard that after my film Serial Killer Culture came out, and in the film was Rick Staten, who was John Wayne Gacy's art dealer, I was told by Hyena Gallery in California that the owner, Bill Schaefer, had not seen so many fake Gacy's until my film came out because, you know, it raises this awareness. So you're right. I mean, somebody could have seen I don't know if there are more than one art kits, but I've seen, you know, one on display, not myself, but I've seen photos of it on display at the True Crime Museum when it existed, which now it's, I believe, the Alcatraz Museum. It's in another state. It was initially in Washington, and they had Gacy's pogo outfits and Bundy's, you know, Volkswagen on display there. So you're right. Somebody could see these things, you know, kind of, you know, create a mock art kit. You know, so you know, again, I'm still researching it. It just fell into my lap this morning, but you know, it's still, again, it's, you know, these things are always fascinating. But you're right. I mean, you know, people to make it fun.
It is. I would love to think that I own something like that. And which art kit? Because unless I'm mistaken, John Wayne Gacy also developed an art kit while he was in prison.
Exactly.
And,
exactly.
You know,
So,
is that not where, that's not where this big, you know, this big blow-up occurred that should an inmate who committed heinous crimes make a profit while they're actually serving time? Because he was he not selling paintings?
Oh, of course. Of course he was. Rick Staten was his art dealer. He would go in and pick the paintings up for Gacy and deposit the money into Gacy's account. I mean, you know what, he could buy soda and, you know, candy bars with it. That's about it. But, you know, it's pretty fascinating. And now that this Mindhunter show is on, it's also interesting that we're seeing kind of the early inceptions of this behavioral science and forensic psychology, as well as some of these, you know, stories of the most well-known serial killers, especially, you know, from the 60s and 70s through the 90s.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, even O.J. was doing all those signatures on things from prison to get money, even though he shouldn't be doing, right?
Yeah, of course, you know, and that's it. You know, again, you know, that whole, you know, I call it, you know, true crime artifact collecting, but it's also called murderabilia, which is the dirty name for it. Yeah. But you know, I mean, people will buy this stuff. There are, you know, collectors, there are fans, and it's definitely a collecting industry, and people are fascinated by it, and that's why, you know, I created the movie and the TV show Serial Killer Culture and Serial Killer Culture TV. some of the upcoming episodes are going to be the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast. It encompasses, such a wide, it's such a broad topic. It's everything from collectors to artists to museums to law enforcement to authors, forensic psychologists, and it's fascinating, and I think it's, that's why I created the TV show, to create an ongoing, more contemporary look at, what's kind of going on within this serial killer culture.
Yeah.
And why not? Marilyn Manson has collected marriage proposals, is he not?
That's what I'm saying. People collect obituaries. When I filmed at the Ripley's Believe It or Not headquarters in Orlando, we were going through their archives. It was just amazing. But the vice president, pointed to several boxes, and he's like, "See these 3 boxes? These are all obituaries." Some collector sent us, he collected obituaries his entire life. People collect different things, whatever their interest is.
Well, I can't wait. I want to go to the Lizzie Borden B&B and order the room with 2 X.
There.
That's right. Yes, exactly. I know. And that's the other thing. We look back at history, and I think you make light of these things because, again, I always say you laugh or you cry, and yes, they are horrific, but I see them as historical. I would love if H.H. Holmes' building was still here and they had tours. I mean, the city would profit off of that immensely.
That would be awesome because I am personally here recently since our interviews, and the documentary that came out, I am actually, and I'm ashamed to say, I'm a fan of H.H. Holmes.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing, when I meet other people interested in serial killers, who's your favorite, and well, that's how we speak, we talk about that, mine is H.H. Holmes, and I'm interested in Gein and fish, and
yes.
And it's really interesting. I mean, everything about these cases are fascinating and interesting, and it just gets more you talk about it because when I travel sometimes I'm apprehensive to talk to people and tell them what I do because they ask, and then I'm like, okay, I make documentaries on serial killers and books, and they're a little turned off, but then I guarantee you an hour later I've got to get away and stop the conversation. Well, no, tell me more about him. Oh, Albert Fish was doing what? And he cooked in an oven and what? He wrote a letter, what? Those early cases, I think, are the most fascinating, and that's why I focus on them.
Well, an American Horror Story did a fascinating job with Hotel, right?
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Now,
it was really interesting. I loved when the one episode when they show the black and white, somewhat reenactments, like the Holmes style, the tribute to Holmes. Yeah. I found it interesting that Kathy Bates actually spoke one of the lines that Harold Schechter said in my film. She said it exactly, that he had lined the rooms with asbestos to make them soundproof. And I'm like, okay, they watched my documentary.
Yeah.
That was their hat tip. It was a hat tip.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right, a little tip of the bowler.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
Now your documentary's on Netflix now, is it?
Well, Holmes is on Netflix now, and all my other films, including my short films, are all on Amazon. Netflix usually renews, yearly, and sometimes they don't renew, or then they will renew, they'll pick it up again. So that's just how Netflix works. But Amazon Prime is, has been amazing because, they opened it up for independent filmmakers to deal with Amazon directly without a distributor, where you can have your film closed captioned, upload it to Amazon, and pretty much have it on Amazon Prime in U.S., U.K., Germany, and Japan. So it's really been a great thing for indie filmmakers.
Yeah, and that's pretty amazing. And actually, and for the other countries like, Canada, and actually most of Europe, that Popcorn TV.
Yes,
they
definitely.
They carry it all as well. And that's pretty amazing, hey, the whole Netflix thing and the whole Amazon and the way it's all gone,
Yeah, it's really great for indies, and the same thing for book publishing. I self-publish all of my books on Amazon, and and that's I've been doing that for the last 4 books, and I'm going to continue on that route. And that's when I had Dahmer's Confession for a while, and I figured, well, what more of a better time period to release them when this new film is coming out. My friend Dahmer, focusing on when Dahmer was in high school.
Yeah. Well, so tell us about that now. So how long have you had that, and where did it come from?
Oh man, I've had it for a long time. I don't even remember where it came from. I mean, the answer really should be a magician never reveals a secret. when I asked Joe Coleman where he gets all his stuff, that was his answer. So that's kind of my answer. But I have had it for a long time, and I've always been fascinated by his case because my story it's somewhat personal. In a sense, because in high school I was interested in doing special makeup effects, and that's what I was doing. That's what I wanted my career to be. But then I decided to go into filmmaking, and my best friend and I, we would both do these special makeup effects, after school and when we'd hang out. So then once I graduated from high school, that's when Dahmer was arrested in '91, and my best friend called me on the phone. He's like, "You gotta come over here." He was like shocked. So I went over to his house, and his father was a detective in Chicago at the time that Dahmer was arrested. So, I went to my friend's house, and he had this file, and he said, "Well, first I thought my dad, I went in his office, and I thought he had my mail. I thought it was a mask catalog for, like, corpse heads and things." Well, he's looking through it, and in this file are all the photocopies that Dahmer took of his victims' heads in the sink and in the fridge. And Dahmer's confession, not complete, but there was a lot of it in there as well. And that, it blew me away. It horrified me. It fascinated me. I still to this day can't get those images out of my head. They were heads in the sink with their eyes open, their mouths open in terror and frozen. And sometimes their hands would be, next to the head that he had cut off. And just like terrifying. So finally, when I went into college at Columbia College here in Chicago and started making films, one of my ones was called State of Mind, and that was about Dahmer. It was like interrogation with a detective and Dahmer, and there would be flashbacks. It was in black and white, and the flashbacks would be in color, to show the horror of kind of, the gore of what actually happened. They were like my usual style. They weren't, explicitly gory, but there would be things like, what going down, pouring things down the toilet, or, getting rid of, some of the remains. And so I've always been fascinated by his case, and I always wanted to do, like, even a feature film, maybe just taking place just in his apartment, like recreating his actual apartment. So that's how, this all came about, and so that was my kind of personal connection to him. And then not too long ago, I had visited Milwaukee and found out that Shaker's, the cigar bar, was the hub of actually all these tours, ghost tours, because the building's haunted, and the Dahmer tour. At the time, they called it the Dahmer tour. Now it's called the Creed City Cannibal tour. And I took that, and I thought, well, I could feature them in Serial Killer Culture, the film, which I did. And they've been on numerous television shows and other programs. And that's kind of how all that came about. And we're having a book signing there at Shaker's Cigar Bar in Milwaukee on November 4th from 4 to 6 at 422 South 2nd Street. And it's a beautiful building. It's from, I believe, 1893, 1894. The Capone brothers had owned the building at one point. There's a ghost of a prostitute that was murdered there in the building. And I did stay overnight there one night, and I was pretty freaked out, but I didn't see anything. But it's a beautiful building, and I'm planning to shoot a feature film there. Hopefully next year. I'm writing the script for it now. And Bob Weitz is amazing. He's the owner, and he knows everything. And, sometimes we'll have Professor Pinkerton, who has this full band that plays great, swing music and 20s and 30s style music. And kind of like going back in time in a sense when you go there. So it's going to be interesting to have this, Milwaukee book signing there.
Yeah. Cool.
So how do you find these locations?
Sometimes they fall in my lap, like the Gacy art kit this morning. Sometimes I seek them out. I'll search the internet. We all know kind of the same people. I kind of say I'm bi because I'm bi horror and I'm bi true crime. I fit into both. I know people from the horror crowd, so I go to horror conventions, and of course, these things overlap. These are horrific stories. So, and I know people from the true crime arena, and many times, both of these, people are interested in horror and true crime, or one or the other. So that's how these things, usually come about. And, for the book, I thought it would be interesting. Okay, it's one thing to release the police statements and Dahmer's confession, but I wanted to, expand it a little bit and have a little bit of a modern, contemporary perspective on it. So forensic psychologist Steve Giangello, he does a forensic psychological profile of Dahmer, which I agree with, that, Dahmer was traumatized at 18 when his entire family left him alone. So psychologically, it kind of makes sense when you flash forward to when he's trying to collect these people and have them around him. He wants this kind of surrogate family, which is morbid, but I believe it's true. And then Bob Weiss, who, runs the Dahmer tours, he remembers Dahmer would come into Shakers. And then after Dahmer was apprehended, he writes in the book about how Shakers was the hub for the investigators. They would all congregate at Shaker's Cigar Bar and talk about the case. And that's when Bob said, oh, wow, this is the guy that used to be in here. And if you go to Shaker's Cigar Bar, Bob had the chair that he used to sit in when he'd come there because it was shorter than the others. So he'll say, it'll be like, that's the Dahmer, the chair that Dahmer had. So, and there's a ton of history.
So I wonder how much that would catch on eBay right now.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. All this stuff. Ed Gein's Cauldron sold recently, and I don't believe it was his, but, you never know. Again, there's that Providence thing, but people buy this stuff. And, another facet of the book, I wanted to also bring in the serial killer culture aspect to the book. So I have an art gallery. And when I was putting the book together, when I was compiling it, I reached out to artists and threw up something on Facebook just saying, hey, if you have any Dahmer art, I'd like to talk about including in the book. There were some artists that had existing Dahmer art that said, I'd love to have it be a part of the book. And then there were some artists that actually created art specifically for the book, which was interesting. Mm-hmm. But again, that shows you that, artists are doing work or have done work on Dahmer because it plays into the serial killer culture fascination. And that's why I wanted to have that in the book. And there are some letters, too, that Dahmer wrote to several different women who I don't know who were, Barbara and Mary. And then Rick Staten also had an interesting letter that he let me publish in the book from the estate of Jeffrey Dahmer, because Rick Staten was interested in possibly purchasing some of this, these vintage, true crime artifacts. And the estate said, no, we've had the auction, everybody, paid in so we could just destroy everything. And because that's what they did with everything that's on Rome, they destroyed it because they don't want it to end up in the hands of supposedly morbid collectors and things like that.
Now, John, tell me if I'm right. Dahmer is somewhat of an enigma. And I say that because back when I was in my early college days, my first degree was actually in psychology. I thought that I was going to be a forensic psychologist. So I did all my studies, and I wrote my term papers on serial killers. And everybody's like, oh my God, you've got to include Dahmer because he was the killer of the time. And I was kind of loath to write about Dahmer because of what he did. Yet now, looking back on it, he's a fascinating character. During your studies and during your writings, have you discovered people that love Dahmer or hate Dahmer?
Yeah, both. Hart Fisher, who published the Dahmer comic, will tell you flat out that Dahmer was a scumbag, and that's what he was. But then, it's interesting, you have these females that there are several Jeffrey Dahmer groups on Facebook, that I recently joined, of course, to help promote the book. Every day I'm seeing these women saying, I am so hot for him. Look at him. I adore him. And when we were doing the Dahmer tour, we interviewed, several women, and the one, female said, hey, I have a friend that loves him. She just adores him. And, there's this strange, kind of psychology thing. It was, whether it was looks or what he did or whether he wanted to completely own these men by, ingesting, cannibalizing parts of their body. It's definitely a fascinating psychology study, but kind of like you're saying, he is kind of an enigma because, he fits into some, the early categorizations of serial killers, such as, yes, he did torture animals, he wasn't a bedwetter, he wasn't a fire starter, but, he had this fascination with the internal workings of the body. And he, there's a story in the My Friend Dahmer book that there was a missing piglet from the biology class, the anatomy class, that he may have stolen. Who knows,
Oh.
But again, I tried to figure him out for so long, but finally when I read, I believe it was Real Life Monsters by Steve Giangello, it really clicked with me that we need a more contemporary perspective on these serial killers because, yes, Mindhunter tells the story of, when they started, 3 or more killings, the triad, bedwetting, fire starting, tortured animal. But, we learn over time you can't place that blanket and you have over them so widely, and you have to take each case individually. And that's why the book Real Life Monsters, I think, is one of the best contemporary books on the subject because, what Steve talks about is that it's not always an abuse. Some weren't abused. Dahmer wasn't abused, but his life with his parents and their divorce and being left alone at 18 years old to fend for himself was trauma. It really affected him. So again, psychologically, to me, it makes a lot of sense that he wanted to make the shrine of bones and collect these people to always be around him. Dennis Nilsen was a serial killer in the UK that they could have been lovers. They both had the same interests. He did the same type of things. He would keep the men's bodies under the floorboards. He lived on the first floor and keep them in the dirt and pull them out every night and bathe them and board them. They wanted this complete control over their victims' bodies. They could do whatever they wanted.
Correct. And I even to this day, I go back and I look at my papers that I wrote, and I even wrote a term paper from a serial killer's perspective. And what I had done, just so that you understand what I did, is I made a composite serial killer of some of my favorites of the time. And of course, that included Zodiac, and then I included Henry Lee Lucas, who admitted to much more than he actually did. We had Otis Toole. We had the people of the time. Mm-hmm. And I composed all of those into one and wrote it from his viewpoint. But when it came to Dahmer, because he was the man of the time, for lack of better terms, what is it about what he did that was just so distasteful that people such as I would be loath to include him?
Yeah, again, sometimes I think, this separation throughout history, like now we could look back at H.H. Holmes' story, from the 1880s, 1890s. It happened so long ago where we kind of disassociate ourselves with it. But, he killed men, women, and children all for money, basically. They were all price tags to him. It was pretty awful what he did, But now it's kind of like this cute, antique Victorian story because it was so long ago. So I think because Dahmer's story is still, somewhat relatively recent in our time period. It wasn't yesterday, but, it's, within, many people will remember it living, now. And again, I think it, just like it's any serial killer, they hunt their prey. But the fact, I think, again, I'm interested in these extreme psychological cases. And Dahmer is one of those. The fact that he wanted to create zombies, that he wanted to own these men, that he would drill into their head, and
pour acid in there.
Well, that too, yeah, But you look at the other side of the coin, and some people feel sorry for Dahmer because they say, he was a lonely guy, and especially being gay at that time period, it was still, taboo, it was becoming more into the public eye, of course, but at that, still on that cusp. So, him and then Gacy before him, they may have had this repressed homosexuality. We're not sure about that. But, some people feel sorry for Dahmer because, he again, they see him just as a lonely person. And what's interesting, one of these guys that he killed stayed with him for 2 weeks. So that shows you that it's like, okay, he wasn't, a traditional pound serial killer where he didn't get them into his apartment and immediately within 10, 15 minutes just killed them. He was lonely. But the one time that the guy stayed with him for 2 weeks, the minute he said, you know what, I got to get going. I've been here for a while. I got to get back home. I was like, well, you know what, let me make you a coffee drink. And that's what he would do. He would make coffee, put sleeping pills in it, knock them out, and then he would strangle them and supposedly then do things to them. And he said they never felt it, but the pictures that I saw, again, of these heads, I don't know, I think they were, unless he posed them later, I don't know if you could do that post-mortem, but, I mean, they were eyes open and mouths open in, like, terror.
Yeah. I've got to be getting home now. It's getting a little bit late. Well, let me make you some Jesus juice.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Now, I say this at much risk to myself, especially as a law enforcement officer, but I've often, kind of sympathized with certain serial killers having studied their psychology. Mm-hmm. And I have a very, very difficult time sympathizing with Jeffrey Dahmer because, he victimized the homosexual community and just the way that he treated his victims. Like you said, he was attempting to create sex slaves or zombies or, for lack of better terms, he was trying to create dolls. He would drill into their heads, pour acid into their skulls in an attempt to zombify them.
Right, and sometimes when they were alive, yeah.
Well, they were all pretty much alive.
Yeah. Yeah, and knocked out, kind of.
The only part that I do understand is the fact that he cannibalized his victims in an effort to maintain a part of them within himself. Because is that not the point of cannibalism throughout history?
Correct. Albert Fish did it. There were many serial killers, Chikatilo. And I think that is, they want to, and that's how can you more completely own somebody than, having a part of them, be a part of your body forever. And of course, Fish was different. He had this religious dementia and believed it was the flesh of Christ and the blood of Christ and sacrament. His story was different, but I think Dahmer was just kind of fascinated. He did say he tasted part of a body, and things. He didn't every single victim. I think he was a little curious about it, kind of like Ed Gein was, again, you don't hear them saying, oh, man, I just had a smorgasbord, or a buffet. It wasn't like that, It was, it was, okay, I'm going to try this, why not? And, what could I say? I had a beef heart last night at a Peruvian restaurant. It wasn't a human heart. It's like, I could say, okay, I kind of know what it tastes like, because I wanted to try it. I'm not going to go as far as human meat, but, but again, yes, and again, I think that's why I love this show Mindhunter that's on now, because it does show the dichotomy. The one FBI officer is fascinated and wants to know everything and wants their autograph and, he wants to study them. And the other guy's just like, oh, these guys are scumbags. They're no good. They just need to be, we shouldn't even talk to them. I don't want to look at them. And of course, I'm sure in law enforcement, you see that a lot, and it disgusts you. It disgusts me a lot when I read about these stories, but I have to, take a different perspective because I'm like the other guy in the show. I'm trying to study them and find out why they did what they did, rather than I'm trying to, but, and whenever I see some of these, actual, photographs of the crime scenes or whatever, it's appalling. It's awful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, these confessions, there was a total of, 60 hours or something?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's at least several hundred pages, 200-something pages.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's why, in the end, I did respect that about Dahmer, just like Dennis Nilsen. In the UK, when Dennis Nilsen, first he was, killing men, like I said, in his first floor apartment, and he would burn the remains in his backyard. But then he moved somewhere where he was living on the second floor. So then he would, like Dahmer, he would, dismember them, boil parts, and then flush parts of their flesh down the toilet, just like Dahmer did. But I guess the UK didn't have as good of a sewer system, and it backed up. So it backed up. Somebody complained. They went down there and found pieces of bones and stuff. So then they realized, okay, the police force came, and right when Dennis Nilsen came home, they were waiting for him by his door. He knew, sometimes many of these serial killers, they can't, they can't turn themselves in, but they want to get caught. So sometimes it's almost like they're waiting to be caught because they're waiting for somebody to intercede these awful things that they're doing. And that happened with Dennis Nilsen. So he knew. He came home. There's the police. First thing he said, there's another body in the closet. First thing he said. And just like Dahmer, right after he was apprehended, gets in the police car, is interrogated, tells the whole story, verbatim. All the victims, here's what happened, here's what I did, and that's that, And that's what Dahmer did. So, and, I have to give him credit for being straightforward at that, at least, because, of course, Gacy, we all know that, to his, defender, he, confessed everything, but then to his dying day, he didn't do it, which is ridiculous, because how can you live even with that smell of, 20-something bodies across state?
Yeah. Well, when you were going through the confessions, was there something that really surprised you in there?
No, I thought it was interesting that he did mention a lot of locales. In Chicago, there was a gay bar called Carol's. He was hunting Chicago as well. He would go to the L&L Tavern, where, strangely enough, Gacy had went to, kind of like that whole Lakeview, Lincoln Park, Boys Town area. There used to be a arcade on Broadway near Diversity that Gacy would go to and hunt for his victims. And Dahmer would go to Old Town. There was a movie theater called the Bijou, and he mentioned these in his statements, and said, when I go to Chicago, I go to Carol's, and I picked so-and-so up, and I took him back. He came back to Milwaukee with me, or he would state, the specific places in Milwaukee where he picked up his victims. So, I was familiar with this case, over the last, several decades, but, reading, there's nothing like reading it from, his own mouth, giving the statement, but it's really, he doesn't hold anything back. He talks about how he cut them up and what he did with them and why he kept them. And, so I had known so much about his case already that, yes, there are, little things that I don't want to give away that, you can learn throughout the statement. But there's nothing like hearing, reading these actual documents. And that's why I publish them for researchers, because then you have everything in one source. It's one book. Everything is right there together, and it's an excellent, research material for any, student or, anyone involved in psychology or law enforcement.
So I wonder what would have happened if the two of them would have met.
Yeah, you know what? There was a book called Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright that was released, I believe, in the 80s or 90s. I think, it was 90s. They had it been after Dahmer because that was the influence. And she does this fictional story of a serial killer from the UK coming to America, and he meets another, American serial killer, and they kind of have this relationship, and the ending's interesting, so yeah, that's another interesting book. It was kind of like, what would have happened if they would have met, who knows, that's what I mean, maybe they wouldn't have, maybe they would have, they both had done the same type of things, Dennis Nilsen would kind of paint himself white, and, look at his body in the mirror like it was a dead body and masturbate to that, because he was always, and Dennis Nilsen, too, he had some trauma when he was a little boy. His grandmother died, who he loved a lot. I think his grandmother or grandfather had passed away. And, when he went to the funeral, he was so shocked to see their dead body. And what did his parents tell them? They're in a better place. So he associated being dead with a better thing. So he was fascinated from that point forward of being around, wanting to be around dead bodies and just having them around him. So again, it might not always be abuse. It could be a trauma or, and that's what I love about the show Mindhunter. I don't believe in the bad theory. I believe, children, are born fine. And to me, through my studies of serial killers, I believe it's their environments that play the biggest factor, especially between 7 and 12 years old, that, when these things happen to them, no matter what it is, an interest, a fascination, a trauma, it sticks with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I noticed you were on a couple episodes of the History Channel on H.H. Holmes being Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, American Ripper.
Yeah. Now, what's your? Do you want to talk about that, or your feelings toward that?
Sure. It was a great opportunity. When the producers had contacted me and wanted me to be on the show, I knew what it was going to be about, and I told them, look, I said, I'll go on your show, but I will not talk about H.H. Holmes being Jack the Ripper, because I don't believe it is. It's almost, impossible. I'm 99% sure. And I just don't believe in the theory. There's a new theory on who Jack the Ripper was maybe every hour, every day, every week. There's a theory. In the end, we'll never know. That's the truth. We'll never know. It's not going to happen. So, what I do like about these shows is that they do teach some history about the true history of Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes. But then, it's that kind of middle area that, to me, it's just, I don't know, it's almost comical in a sense, which is sad, but it's just, it's like, I give them credit, but, I think they tried to take an hour or two story and stretch it into 8 episodes. And again, that's fine for them. People enjoyed it, but, I felt it was a stretch.
Yeah. No, me too. I kind of thought it was too much. And it's all based on just kind of thought. There's no evidence. There's nothing new.
No. I mean, when they show a photo of a sketch of what somebody in the 1800s, London thought Jack the Ripper may have looked like, which is basically like what every male of that time period looked like, handlebar mustache. I mean, pretty much every man. And then they take that and superimpose it over Holmes's face, and they look at each other in shock like they've just discovered a miracle. It's like, really? No. That's not evidence. That's not evidence. And then there was another part where they had taken a camera and went into the Chicago River because they had thought that Holmes may have dumped a trunk with a victim down there, and they said, well, if there's holes in the Chicago River, he may have dumped the, crate in the river. So then they go down there, and, well, there's holes in the river.
Yeah.
Well, hundreds of holes. And then once again, the shocked looks, oh, my God. I'm like, those are holes. That's not evidence.
Yeah.
I want evidence. That's just me,
Yeah, that's it, because I couldn't watch the last 2 episodes. I think it was just, I just can't do this anymore because it's an hour long of, but nothing,
Yeah, and I'm not superstitious. I'd like to see a ghost. I never have. I believe in them, but I've never seen them. But, they always talked about this Holmes curse, and I don't believe in it. But, many people supposedly did die. Well, they died, of course. People are going to die. But they said that were involved with the original Holmes case. So then I'm thinking, okay, well, if this thing does exist and you're digging him up when he wanted to purposely have 10 feet of concrete on top of his body so nobody would dig him up and you're doing it, I don't think he's going to be too happy about that.
Yeah, you're just asking for the curse.
Yeah, and it was him in there. There was no doubt. But that, too, was sensationalism. Yeah. He might have escaped the gallows. No, I mean, all the reporters were there. Do you know how extremely it's impossible for somebody to do that, especially at that time period? They said he had shaved his, he had grown a beard, but he had shaved it to have his, handlebar mustache, and that's what he walked to the gallows with, and that was it. It was done, and they matched his skull to photos of, the skull that they had taken at the time period when, he had, been executed, and they matched, so it was him.
Yeah, it's grasping at straws. We get a lot of Jack the Ripper shows, and that
a lot.
Yeah, and that one was just, come on. It was just, give us some evidence, something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's got to be evidence. They all try and hinge on this. Well, there was that one year that, nobody knows where Holmes was, but it's like, well, he's not going to, especially at that time period, he's going to document every single step he takes? No, of course not. And for him to go all the way to the UK, it's not his MO to, sloppily hack up these prostitutes, which is against his MO. He wouldn't do that. He's not sloppy. He covered everything up so well, they didn't even know that he was killing people until, it came out and they found the bodies of the children. No one knew.
Now, wasn't it true that he also, when he killed people in his castle, didn't he like to hear them suffer?
Well, we don't know that because there were no eyewitnesses. I think, that may have started with Schechter's book, because he had mentioned, with his knowledge of serial killers, sure, maybe he did enjoy watching them, being murdered. But over time, I don't know, because I think I think that was all the dirty work. He didn't want to get his hands dirty. You look at the methods of the way he murdered people. It was really hands-off, fire, gas. It wasn't like stabbing or with a gun, which is a more communicative way of murdering. It's very hands-off. So he was above everybody, of course. That's what he thought he was. So he didn't want to get his hands dirty. So, I thought, yeah, maybe, he would have looked in and listened to him. Maybe he did that sometimes, but I seriously think he just wanted to get the job done and move on, because every single murder was for profit. Every single one, when you look at them. Well, people say, well, what about that one? What about that one? Well, yeah, the mistresses, he had them sign off on money or property, or if you needed to get rid of them, they knew something. But most of them, especially the entire Keitzel family, he wanted to murder all of them, for the entire insurance, so he could keep the entire insurance, money, instead of splitting it with, Carrie Keitzel. So everything, it was all profit motivated.
I wonder how many people he'd have thrown themselves at him in prison if he was alive.
Oh, yeah, right. That's true. And that's the thing. Look at Richard Ramirez and a lot
Charles
of these people
Manson.
they have. Yeah, right,
Yes.
They have their fans, and people love it. Now, whether they, are actually enamored by them, sure, or, we don't know people's motivations, too, because the minute that, the woman wants to marry, Charles Manson, well, she's going to get her 15 minutes of fame, so that might be her motivation. Who knows,
Yeah. Well,
Now-
wasn't her name Bambi or something?
Yeah, right.
Now, honestly, that leads me to a question. Now, we're sitting here talking about listening to people suffer. I've been sitting here for 3 minutes listening to this, and I'm suffering. Because
It doesn't take much for him,
No, because I am such a wordsmith. I got to talk. Now, with Jeffrey Dahmer, okay, now we just mentioned Richard Ramirez, and we mentioned Marilyn Manson, but who in their right mind would write to Jeffrey Dahmer and say, please marry me? I am so in love with you, marry me. I mean, I know that you studied the case, but did you ever study the people that are on the fringes and are actually interested in these people?
Right, and that's a whole other psychological, forensic psychological, examination of, these certain people that are very obsessed. Because, like through my studying serial killers, I found that there's this tier system, of sure, maybe at the bottom you've got these crazy obsessed weirdos, as they say. Yes, there are some of those. Not many, but there are some out there. But then, as you go up that tier, you have then people with a kind of general fascination. Almost anybody's going to read a book about them, watch a show about them, maybe not say it in public because they don't want to think they're a weirdo, but they will watch this stuff and listen to it, and read books on it. And then you've got the next tier above them, maybe collectors or people that want to buy these books and, are obsessed, but, it's more of a healthy obsession, that they want to learn why they're doing these things. And then you go above that, and you've got people in law enforcement. I know a law enforcement officer in Springfield, that, he's a law enforcement officer, he owns 3 Casey paintings. So, people in law enforcement, we have to admit they're somewhat fascinated by these things, too. Of course, everyone's different. I'm not saying across the board they're going to collect these things. But, and then you go above that, and you've got psychologists and, sociologists and, so it's a pretty wide spectrum of people that are interested in this, but you're right. It would be very interesting to study some of these people, but, some of these people don't want to come forward. Some might want to say, yes, they want their 15 minutes of fame, but then the others are afraid they will be made to look, the weirdos that they are and say, hey, I want to, or maybe they're not, again, we have to study them and wonder and find out why they want to marry a serial killer or why they're obsessed with them. I don't know if they've ever done a film on that. I've wanted to, and I've reached out to some people, but usually they kind of push back and they just don't want to make a big deal out of it or be featured in something, that they'll mention it. They just don't want it to be focused on in a documentary.
Now, you mentioned something very, very key, and I'm thinking now, let me put on my other hat here as a law enforcement officer. You have people that are not willing to come forward, but legally they don't have to. And here's why I say that. We have an unnamed show that's on television, and starring Kevin Bacon, and I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you have those people who, in the show, they're all admirers of one serial killer. They're all followers, almost to a cult level. And I'm trying to be very, very careful with my language. Now, if said serial killer goes to prison and they're mailing him, you have implied consent. We can look at your mail, we can see who you are, and now we can look at you, because if there are copycat, killings going on, we need suspects, and you are now said suspect because you are admiring of said killer. Yeah. And I'm using
I hope Wichita police didn't think that of me when they subpoenaed my records for everyone that bought H.H. Holmes DVD.
Yeah.
It was like, no, but they might, right? I mean, but these things, I'm sure, believe me, I'm sure I'd get flags, and Catherine Ramslin, who's a writer and forensic profiler, all of us that are, professionally into it, I'm sure we get flags all the time, but, that's part of it, but you're right. I mean, when somebody immediately writes these, I had written Keith Jesperson for a year, and, I was, foolish enough not to realize that he was kind of playing me too, because years before he had written me and said, well, you should do a film on me, and I thought, well, I'm not too interested in him, and I was working on other projects. So then years went by, and then I finally wrote him. I'm like, okay, well, there might be something. Maybe we could do a TV show where it's my relationship with you, and, we could film me, come and interview you, or blah, 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 whatever, build a story, a short series, a mini-series around it. And then when it finally came to time to, pin him down, oh, no, I'm not interested. Somebody else is doing a book on me. But the entire time I was writing him, what did he ask me for? Money, money, money. And I refused to send him a penny. That's all he wanted. That's it. And he strung me along just like he would string another victim along.
Oh, absolutely right. Hell, I am free. I am outside of jail. And again, I say this at great risk to myself. I'm a law enforcement officer, but, I have studied serial killers for, my college career. So I could run around stabbing people and say, hey, John, guess what I just did? You need to write a movie about this.
Well, is that what you're doing?
Well, not yet.
We're
talking to the expert, Al.
I want exclusive rights to your story.
Yes.
Life story. Story rights is what it's called.
Well, let's set a date for next week. No.
They always go missing. We keep missing engineers all the time.
That's right, exactly.
Keep saying they just left. Well, time is wrapping up now. Again, it's been a real pleasure to have you. And so the new book is called Dahmer's Confession, the Milwaukee Cannibals Arrest Statements. And our guest has been John Borowski. Thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's do it again soon. Thanks, guys.
Oh, it has been an absolute honor. Thank you.
To find out more about our show, guests, or listen to a previous show, visit our website at www.somethingweirdmedia.com.
The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end!
I'll see you.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.